Okay, good morning. Today's daf is daf lamed chet of Zevachim. Let me share my screen and we will get started. Yesterday we saw that a machlokes between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai says that for sin offerings, two applications of blood are needed to effect atonement. And Beit Hillel says, no, one is sufficient. Just like for all other sacrifices, one is sufficient. And Beit Shammai agrees that for all other sacrifices, one is sufficient. So they only argue about with the sin offerings, the chatas offering, whether or not you need one or two. One for Beit Hillel, two for Beit Shammai. And yesterday, we saw one explanation of this debate based on the word karnot, how it's written, how it's pronounced. Beit Shammai focuses on how it's pronounced, that it's karnot three times, so that's a total of six. Four times for each of the requirements that you need to do it, but then two times for it being mandatory. And Beit Hillel says, no, it's four. It's either four or five, depending on the different reads. But the bottom line is three are voluntary, one is mandatory. Now we're going to quote a brisa that provides a different explanation for why, according to Beit Hillel, one application is sufficient. So we are on the fifth line of Lamed Chet Amud Aleph, near the end of the line. And the Gemara says, "V'tanya Maisi," that La Mehacha. There is a Tana that says that we can derive Beit Hillel's position from the following: V'chiper, v'chiper, v'chiper. It says three times during the course of the discussion of the chatas offerings, not all about a traditional chatas offering. One is the first one. These are psukim. Let me see which psukim are these from. These are from Vayikra Perek Dalet Pasuk Kaf Vav Lamed Aleph and Lamed Hey. The first one relates to the Nasi's chatas, and then the others are a regular person's chatas with a goat, or regular person's chatas with a sheep. But the bottom line is we have these words v'chiper three times, mimnei adin, and because really, before we tell you what the three chipers are, let's go through the logic. Here's the logic that we might have thought in connection with whether or not a sin offering, how many applications of blood a sin offering would require. V'halo dinhu, because we got the following logical argument. Nemru damim lamata, it says in connection with the blood that is required to be put on the mizbeach below the line, as Rashi understands it, v'nemru damim lamala, and there's of course blood that needs to be put on the mizbeach that goes above the line, namely the chatas offering that we're now talking about. So ma'mata damin hamurim lamata shinasan b'matana achas kiper, that when it comes to the different kinds of sacrifices like an ola and a shlamim, that when you apply the blood below the line, it's sufficient to apply just one application, and then the effect of the sacrifice takes effect. So too, I would say that a blood application above the line, above the line would be sufficient to affect atonement. And so, under this argument, you wouldn't even need it. We could just say that one application is sufficient. Problem is, or we could go a different way. And here's another logic. We also have blood applications inside the Heichal, in the Kodesh, on the inner altar, the golden altar, and we also have blood applications that are applied on the outer altar. When it comes to the inner applications of blood on the Mizbeach HaZahav, if you omit one, then you've done nothing. Your entire sacrifice is invalid. So maybe we could say that in fact, if you were to miss even one blood application on the outer altar, you would also have done nothing. So we see that we have good arguments in both directions. And now, which one of these arguments makes the most sense? The Brisa continues. Nira lami domel. Which one's more comparable? Done in chutz michutz. Do we say that, well, let's focus on just things with the outer altar, and therefore we'll focus on the other kinds of offerings and learn from them for the chatas? Ve'ein done in chutz mibivnim, and we won't learn the outer altar from the inner altar, because after all, they're different altars. Or we could say the opposite. Done chatas v'arba kuranos, mechatas v'arba kuranos. Or we could say, hey, we have both the inner altar and the outer altar are dealing with sin offerings, and they're dealing with situations where the at least lichatchila one needs to put the blood on four different corners. So so let's not focus on the other kinds of sacrifices that are below the line and are put on the outer altar, because they're not sin offerings and they don't go on the four corners, on the four horns of the Mizbeach, the four corner raised portions of the Mizbeach that effectively constitute horns. So we don't have a definitive way to go. Now it's interesting because we could say, hey, well, we have two reasons that the inner are more like the outer and one reason that the outers are more like the outer. So let's go with the two. But that's not the way the brisa goes. Instead, we get the pasuk Talmud Lomar v'chiper v'chiper v'chiper. We have a reference to v'chiper three times. Again, the first time for the nasi, the next two times are for a goat and a sheep. And so the first v'chiper afal pisha lo nasan ela shalosh. So we start with the fact that you have to do four. And so the first v'chiper, we're going to say, oh, okay, so that takes off one requirement. Now maybe we only need to do three applications. V'chiper afal pisha lo nasan ela shtayim. So now we're going to say, no, v'chiper the second time tells us we don't even need to do three. Two is sufficient. And finally, the chiper afal bisha lo nasan ela achas. So the third repetition, each of the references to chiper takes away one of the obligatory applications and makes it non-essential. You don't have to do it, or if you don't do it, it's still going to be valid. But one second, though, how can we possibly say that in fact we use the v'chiper for this purpose? The v'hai mi boile legufei, we need it for its own purpose, as Rashi tells us, last of the narrow lines in Rashi, mi boile legufei b'chol chad v'chad, for each one of this lilamdach, in order to teach you shekiper al hachet, that it atones for the sin. If maybe it doesn't actually atone for the sin, the sacrifice. So how do you know that it atones for the sin? It's because it says v'chiper. So how can we use something that is telling us one thing, and now you're saying that it's not wasn't required in the pasuk, and we're going to learn something else from it? We needed it to tell us that we are atoned through these sacrifices. So Rava says, Bar Ada Mari, the son of Ada, who's my teacher, Asbrali, he explained it to me. Amar Kra v'chiper, the Torah does say v'chiper, but it also says v'nislach, and it also says forgiven. Zuhi kapara, zuhin slicha. The same concept is covered. Kapara and slicha really are the same idea. And therefore, the phrase v'chiper, the word v'chiper, is now in fact superfluous. And so as a result, we can actually use it in order to do the teaching that we just said, namely the first time to tell us that only three are required, the second time to tell us two are required, and the third time to say that only one is required. And the bottom line is that only one is required because we have all three. One second though, how do you know that it's telling us that the one that you're taking away eliminates the obligation to put the um, blood on the altar at all. Ema, let's say something else. Let's do a different kind of lesson. V'chiper, the first time it says v'chiper, aval pishalon nasan ela shalosh lamala v'achas lamata. Maybe when it's allowing you, if we're trying to sort of create the smallest additional chiddush, so then we should say that v'chiper is telling us, the first time it says v'chiper, it's telling us that, you know what? Three corners are required, and the fourth corner, you could put it below the line. You don't need to put it above the line, as is generally required. After all, as we saw over the last couple of weeks, some people will say that if you put it in the wrong place, it will still affect atonement. And after, especially if it's below, because it will eventually drip down to below. So in any event, v'chiper, so maybe let's do the first v'chiper, tells us three above and one below. V'chiper, and then the second v'chiper, aval bishalo nasan ela shtayim lamata v'shtayim lamala. Maybe it'll be 2 and 2. And then v'chiper, the third time, aval bishalo nasan lamala ela lamata. Maybe you don't have to put any above, and you put it all below. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, I don't understand. Didn't you just skip one? Meaning, shouldn't the third v'chiper be that you don't put 3 above, you put only 1 above, and you put 3 below? Now, the end of Tosfos suggests that maybe that's in fact what Rashi's saying, or that's a different understanding of Rashi, but that isn't in our current Rashi. But Tosfos addresses that question directly and thereby explains how we can understand this idea. So let's take a look at the fifth Tosfos. V'chiper aval pisha lo nasan lamala ela lamata. Well, Tema, amai ifsik meseder shehitchil lidrosh. How come it stopped the pattern that it began? Dehavale lamemer v'chiper aval pi shalo nasan lamala ela achas v'shalosh lamata. Why didn't it tell me the suggestion of let's put 1 above and 3 below? So why didn't it do that step? And by the way, the Gemara is going to end up going to that step as another possibility in a short while. But v'yesh lomer delo mashmale lidrosh sheyaseh lamata ela behakosher damim ela behakosher damim hanitanin lamata lamata. So that the whole point is that when we say that you need to put the blood below, you need to put the blood below in a manner that is kosher. And when we put the blood below, it's vishtayim lamala, ushtayim lamata. And when we said 2 above and 2 below, what do we mean? The ka'amar that we said, hainu shiyase lamata achas shehishtayim. That in general, when you put the blood below in a method that is one application that is intended to cover 2 sides, you put it on a corner and you effectively get 2 sides of the Mizbeach. V'chein v'chiper. And so as a result, when we have the third v'chiper, afal pisha nasan kula lamata. Hainu kedin shar damim hanitanin lamata. Meaning you have to put it on the below the way we would ordinarily put it below. And what does that mean? It means you put it on each of 2 corners, effectively covering all 4 sides. Lamata hanitanin lamata. Abal I amrat. But if you were to say that you have 1 above and 3 below, havi lamata you would have 1 that is covering 2 sides and then 1 covering 1 side. And so as a result, that wouldn't be a valid way of putting the blood below posel, and that wouldn't make it invalid. V'hainu Trei shenuye sheruba lamata. And that would be effectively 2 different kinds of changes, and you'd have a majority of them below and in an improper method. And how come, though, if you're going to say that, what about the first v'chiper where you have 3 above and 1 below? Isn't that an improper way of accomplishing the application of blood below, because the application of blood below is always on the corner and covers two sides. Begam ha'achas eno kamishpat kamishpat damim shalmata. And although we said one below, it isn't the right method. About shalosh lamala, achas lamata, but three above and one below works because afal pisha osa achas enu kamishpat. Even though the one below isn't in the proper way, ain kapeda kevan shah rov lamala. Since the majority is above, it's okay to have one below that isn't the proper method. So the bottom line is that Tosfos is pointing out that when we put blood below, we use one application to cover two sides, and therefore, when we say that we're going to have more than two applications, then we must be covering all four sides with those two applications. And so as a result, it's the real situation is all four sides are covered below, and therefore none of them would need to be covered above. So that's the Gemara's question. How come we don't say that what we're really allowing is all four to be above, below, and none to be above? So Amar Rav Ada.
I'm a little confused with Tosfos. If he's saying that one below would cover two sides, then two below should cover all four sides, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
So if you have three below, you certainly cover all four sides.
No,
right?
no. The problem is that that third one isn't a valid application. So that's why that becomes problematic. That's exactly the point.
So it seemed like it's Yudar. It's unnecessary. It's
correct, and as a result, because we need to say that it's somehow necessary, because we're saying it's essential, right? We say that you absolutely have to do it. So the way I understand him as saying is that in order to do three sides, you would effectively do one application that would cover two sides, and then the third side you would cover just the side and not the corner. But that's not the way you apply it.
Right.
You're supposed to apply it on the corner to cover all four sides. And once you do that, well, then you don't need anything above, because the whole point is that they're supposed to complement each other. And so because majority is now below, if you have three sides, and if you have three sides, three above and one below, well, the majority is still above. So as long as the majority is kosher, so those are kosher applications, so we're fine. But now that you're
why
saying
wouldn't two above also be good if one?
Yes, exactly. Well,
sides?
that's why the Tosfos is only addressing for us the situation of one above and three below. Why didn't the Gemara give us that question? And he's saying it didn't give us that question because there is no way to accomplish that in a way that makes sense. Because we are going to apply the blood below just as we would in an ordinary case that wouldn't be a chatas. And so that doesn't make any sense. So now we have the question. So again, the Gemara's question is, why not use the three v'chi pairs to tell us that you know what it's okay to do? Instead of doing one above and that's it, one corner, that's the way Beis Hillel understands it. Instead of saying that, let's say that what it's teaching us with the three v'chi pairs is that, you know what, you can instead just do the putting of the blood as if it was all below. With the two applications on the opposite corners, so that you cover all four sides. So the Gemara answers, Rav Ada bar Yitzchak, Im Kain bitalta Torah's kranos. But if you did that, the Torah says that you're supposed to put the blood on the four corners, on the four horns of the Mizbeach. Those are clearly above the line. So how could we possibly undermine the entire process? What second? The Irachmana Amar. But libatlun, we can undermine the process because although the Torah is telling us that lichatchila you should do it, by repeating v'chiper 3 times, it's saying it's okay not to do it. So that shouldn't be an answer. So Amarava, Ezahu daravar shitzarach shalosh. Have amor elu kranos. No. The bottom line is, and let's take a look in Rashi. Rashi helps us understand because it's very, very unclear language. The literal language is because what's the object that needs to reference three? The corners need the horns need to reference three. So ezu davar shetzarach shlosha v'chiper, which is the one that requires three references of v'chiper? Havi omer. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's just note that we're in Rashi. We started in the fifth of the wide lines at the bottom of Rashi. Ezu davar shetzarach shlosha v'chiper. Which item requires three repetitions of the word v'chiper? Havi omer elu kranos. We should say that that's what is referring to the horns. V'kida amrinan to kol chad v'chad miyat chada. Karen, that each reference to v'chiper reduces one reference to one required application to a corner. V'kamle akeren achat la'akev. And so as a result, you come to the conclusion that only one corner is essential. Because if you were to instead use the logic that you were just using, that in fact it's telling us that all the applications can be below. Arba, that in fact you can do all of the four applications below. V'chiper, I'm sorry, Arba v'chiper havale lemichtav. It should have said the lemichtav four times. Lahakshir arba hamatanos lamata, in order to tell us that the four corners, the four applications are sufficient below. So the fact that it didn't do that, it makes much more sense to do the reading as I wanted to, as we originally said, that we should do three, that only one corner, one horn of the Mizbeach is required, and three is essential in order to accomplish atonement. And three, although you're supposed to do that, if you don't do it, then you won't lose your atonement.
But you don't have two. You don't have two. If you do two of them, then you can capture all four sides. If you do just one, you're not going to capture all four sides, and most you'll capture two sides.
Well, no, remember that here we're dealing with putting it on the horns of the Mizbeach. That is a small, I believe, amma by amma corner in each of the four corners of the Mizbeach that are elevated, and you're putting it, I believe, on top of those corners. So it's not on the sides of the Mizbeach as you would if it was below the line. And so as a result, there is no putting it below, so to speak. There is no putting it at the corner on the side. You're putting it on the flat surface, not on the vertical surface. So I don't think so. The point is that only one of those is sufficient, and according to Beit Hillel, and that's and it does, it's not even clear that you could do it on any of them. You don't have to. There's no specific one that is even required. But in any event,
if you put it on a corner, that would essentially cover two sides because the corner represents the top and the side.
No, but the chronos that we're talking about are the horns, which are referring to a flat surface on the top of the altar that is elevated above the above the rest of the surface of the altar. And so it's not literally on, although these horns are in the corner, right. The blood is being put on a surface that is perpendicular to the earth, not that is vertical, and on a surface that is horizontal and parallel to the earth, and not on a surface that is perpendicular to the earth. And so it's not going on. Now you can treat it as if, well, because the corner, the elevated corner on the top, on the roof of the altar is in four corners, you can consider the application to go on the two sides of the Mizbeach, but the application is actually, I believe, on the rooftop surface of the horn and not on the vertical surface. But in any event, even if that were true, the point is that we're talking about how many of the horns get blood, and it's only one that's required according to Beit Hillel. Again, Beit Shammai, which we saw yesterday, requires two. But now, we've answered the question because at the end of the day, it makes much more sense to say that the three Vechi pairs are eliminating one corner each. But now we say Ema v'chiper afal pisha lo natan ela achas lamala v'shalosh lamata. Well, why not just say that the three Vechi pairs are telling us that we should do one above, one horn, and three sides below, and three below it. So lo matzinu damim shechetzion lamala v'chetzion lamata. Bottom line is, we don't see anywhere where you put part of the blood above the line and part of the blood below the line. And now we're going to try a couple of times to say, don't we have that situation? But we're not going to be successful. So this is in fact the answer. And so the bottom line is v'chiper, v'chiper, v'chiper tells us only one. But below, is it not true that we sometimes have a blood above and blood below? V'atanan, hizami menu achaz lamala v'sheva lamata, as we just had for Yom Kippur, that when the blood is sprinkled, you do one up and seven down. And isn't the one up an indication, our Hava Amina is that it goes above a certain line, and the seven below is below a certain line? No, kamatzlif. You doing it like a matzlif. My kamatzlif, what does that mean? Machve Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda showed kiminagdana, that it's like somebody who's using a whip. And Rashi explains kimanganda, Kiman Gadna. So 3, 6, 7 lines up near the end of the line from the bottom of Rashi on Lamechedam and Aleph, Kiman Gadna. Ka'adam hamak malkos arbayim biritzua, like somebody who's whipping somebody with the 40 whips with a whip. Zulamata mizu. Each one goes below the last one. Besamuch, and nearby. It doesn't mean that when we do the sprinkling with the blood, where one is above and seven are below, it doesn't mean that one of them is above the halfway mark, and the rest are below the halfway mark. But rather, and that which we say that the one is different. Chaluka mehasheva le'inyan sidud yado. It differs in which way your hand is facing. Vikatani, and as we saw, kinemafarish hasam, as we saw over there in Meseches Yoma, keshehu mazel lamala mitzaded yado lamata. When you're trying to sprinkle up, you face the back of your hand down, so your palm is facing up. Because right? And that way, when you're doing this sprinkling motion, it's going up. Whereas mitzaded yad b'kashehu mazel lamata, and when you're sprinkling down, again, you mitzaded yado lamala, the back of your hand is facing up because you're going to sprinkle like this, and it's going to go down. So that's how it all works. But it's not about part being above a particular line and part being below a particular line. So we have eliminated and we have shown that in fact this is not a case of partial above and partial below. But what about the following? He's a altar rosh el mizbeach sheva pamim. We are told that you're supposed to sprinkle the blood. Again, this is in connection with the sprinkling of the blood of the Yom Kippur offerings on the golden altar inside the Kodesh, inside the Heichal. And it says that you put it on the Taharo Shel Mizbeach. And what is that Taharo? Lav apalge de Mizbeach? Isn't it the midpoint of the Mizbeach? Keda Amri Inshe Tahar Tihara de Yoma, that the purity of the day has come, meaning what is the purity of the day? Noon. So as a result, isn't that what we're talking about? And so Rashi and Tosfos disagree as to how this is the question. Meaning, what is the question that this is asking? According to Rashi, it's saying, well, look, if you're supposed to put it midway up on the golden altar, you can't do it exactly to the midpoint. And so as a result, when you apply the blood, some of it will end up being above the midpoint and some of it will be below the midpoint. Tozos disagrees and he suggests no, what this is complementary to the additional blood that we know goes on the top of the altar that as part of the Yom Kippur service. And so that's what it's referring to. And that Tosos is the last Tosos on Lamed Ched Amud Aleph. So my lav apalge de mizbech the imkain matzi as Rash Tosos says again Lamed Ched Amud Aleph, last Tosos, V'im kain matzinu damim chetzion l'mala v'chetzion l'mata, because we'll end up seeing some will be above, some will be below. Demitchila nasan ar karnos, because you first put it on the horns of that mizbeach, and those horns are all above the median line. And then you put it below at the halfway mark where it's going to be that location. And Tosos, that's what Tosos says, Rashi Mefarish, but in Acher, and Rashi offers the other interpretation, which I already gave you, which is that no, when you try to do it halfway, we can do it inside. My lab, apalge the mizbeach, Keneged Chatzi Gufho, opposite this is the top Rashi on Lamed Chet Bet. You put it opposite halfway up the mizbeach. The efshar litzimtzem, and it's not possible to do it exactly in the midline and to have it stay there. Elish yehei miktasan lemala miktasan lemata. Bottom line is you'd end up doing half above and half below. So isn't that what we're talking about? And of course the answer is no. Amarava barshila lo igiluye. No, what we're talking about is the uncovered roof of the mizbeach. And diksiv ucheetzem hashamayim letohar, that it was appeared like the heavens in purity. What does that mean? It means that you cleaned off the upper part of the mizbeach. Take a look in Rashi, third line down. Second line down, last word on the line. Lo igiluye habde mizbeach. Al gago, on the roof of the mizbeach, shel mizbeach, shahaya mitaharo tchila mideshen. That the first thing you do is you cleanse it from all the ashes that are there, shalav, that are on it. Umigala es gago, and you reveal the golden roof of the altar. Va'al shemitaharo, and because you've cleansed it, umiyafahu, and you made it more beautiful, karile taharo. That's why we're going to call it like you purified it. Kidiksiv v'taharo, as we say sometimes that you purified something. So the bottom line is that's what we're talking about, or should say litohar, which is the word that the pasuk that the Gemara quotes there. So if you take a look at the letter Vav, that's a reference to litohar. That is the word that's a pasuk that is from Shmot Kaf Dalid Perak Yud, Pasuk Yud, Perak Kaf Dalid Pasuk Yud, where it talks about the after the leaders of sit down to eat the meal, they look up at heaven and see heaven, and so that is the context of that pasuk, and the point is that they see the purity, meaning that they see it directly, that it's not, there's nothing in between that is referencing that is interrupting their visibility. Okay, so
is Rashi versus Tosfos here making it? It seems to me if the one is sprinkling the blood, he can't control exactly where it goes.
that's correct. That's what Rashi. That's a part of what Rashi is saying. That's
unless
exactly.
one actually takes the finger and puts it on there. But if you're sprinkling it, it may not be completely controlled. A little bit below, a little bit. You may not go exactly where you want to.
Correct. But even if you were to do it with your finger, right? Because the midline of anything is infinitesimally thick, right? You would automatically, and our fingers are not infinitesimally small. Therefore, you would not be able to put it even if you touched it, you would not be able to put it below. But it would be interesting to think whether maybe they're debating as to how the application is, but I haven't seen anybody that says that. But the other interesting approach is to note that it could be that that although the outer altar has a midline that is a relevant demarcation between above and below, it could be that for Rashi, he's okay saying, okay, so we will imagine a midline of that of the altar. But Tosfos would say, no, when it comes to the outer altar, you have a line on the altar, so therefore you will have above and below. But here we don't have a line. So as a result, the above and below means either on the roof of the altar or on the side of the altar. And there is no, midline that we would focus on. So that can also be an aspect of the debate that they're having here.
So one was not as precise as the other then.
Correct, exactly. Va'ika Shirayim. So last of our third tries to show that there's something that's above and below. What about the leftover blood? Because we know that if we do a sin offering, after whatever blood is left goes on the base of the altar. So here we've got a sin offering that we put one of the corners above, and then we put the rest of the blood on the base of the altar. No, Shirayim lo ma'akve, that is not necessary, that's not required, and therefore it's not a situation of above and below. Whoa, 1 second. We saw yesterday, I believe, that there's somebody who says that when it comes to the leftover blood that you put on the inner altar, on the golden altar, that blood that's left over is required to be put on the base of the outer altar. Bechad makom kamrinim. Nah, but those are two different mizbeachs. Yes, you have to put the part of the blood on the upper part, on the top of the inner altar, and you're putting the shirayim on the bottom of the outer altar. So some is going on the top and some is going on the bottom. But that's not what we're talking about here. That's two different mizbeachs. So what we're trying to find is a case where you put above and below, and it's required on the same mizbeach. And so we haven't found that. And therefore, although technically one could argue that really when it says v'chiper 3 times, it should mean that you put one application above and 3 applications below. But because we never find a requirement to have applications both above and below, therefore we're going to say that when we say that that when the v'chiper is repeated 3 times, what it's telling us is it just means it's just talking about the applications to the horns, and therefore the 3 times is telling us that 3 of the horns are not essential to getting atonement, and only 1 is essential to getting atonement.
Does it matter which horn?
And it doesn't say. We have not said which horn. My apologies for not scrolling. And so we've not said which horn. And so that is the conclusion of this discussion. And so now we're going to cite a brisa that furthers our understanding of this machlokas. And it highlights this discussion that we're about to have, highlights the fact that basically, whenever you have a stringency in one direction, it often results in a leniency in a different direction. So, Tanya, we have a brisa. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, Beis Shammai Omrim, Shtei matanos shebechatas ve'achas shebechol hazvachim. When it comes to applications, you need 2 for a sin offering and 1 for everything else. And that is what? Matiros, that is what permits us to eat the meat associated with those sacrifices, umifaglos. And that is what an improper thought, a pigul thought, namely that you're going to eat it outside the regular time, or you're going to burn it outside the regular time, that kind of thought during it will cause the sacrifice to be pigul. Beit Hillel Omrim, and you would have to do so, very important, you would have to have that thought for both of the applications. It's not sufficient to have it for one application. Because remember, in order to be pigel, you need everything else to be valid. You need everything else to be valid. So Beis Hillel Omrim that when it, no, it's one is sufficient. One is sufficient for a sin offering, just like for everything else. Materes, one is enough to cause it to be able to be eaten, the sacrifices, and one is sufficient to cause pigel. So Maskifla Rav Oshia, so Rav Oshia asks, Im Kain, Lisnaye Gabi Kule Beis Shammai V'chumre Beis Hillel. We should learn this as one in Maseches Eidiot, which is various testimonies. One area of Eidiot goes through all of the stringencies where Beit Hillel is, which is usually, Beit Hillel is usually more lenient, and Beit Shammai is usually more strict. And it says the situations where Beit Shammai is more lenient and Beit Hillel is more strict. And yet, here is one of those cases because, as Rashi says, Bechad. Which Rashi? Lisnier, there it is. Rashi, it's 1, 2, 3. From the top of the narrow lines of Rashi, it's 17 lines down. Last word on the line. Lisnier, why didn't we learn it? Lahach plugsa be'ediot. We should have learned this argument in Maseches Ediot. Gabi kule Beit Shammai, by the leniencies of Beit Shammai. Shekulan nisteru b'mishnas Ediot, because they're all supposed to be listed in the Mishnayos and Ediot. V'ha nami kule Beit Shammaihu. And this should be a leniency of Beit Shammai. Dila Beit Shammai, low pigel. You don't actually accomplish making this sacrifice pigel. Ella imkain chishev b'shteyem. You have to have that same pigel thought by both of the applications because both of them are required. And it's only if you do something that is both required is it going to make the thing pigel. Or Beit Hillel pigel ba'akas man. But according to Beit Hillel, if you have a pigel thought even with respect to one application, it's sufficient. Now, of course, it has to be the first application. Once you have another application, it won't be. But if you have the pigel thought for the first application and not for the second application, for Beit Hillel, it's pigel, and for Beit Shammai, it's not pigel. That's a big leniency that Beit Shammai offers. So Amarle Rava says no. Ki itchel, when this question was discussed, and the focus of the question as to whether or not it is a stringency or a leniency, that ki itchel, when it was asked, let tera itchel. It was asked with respect to saying that the meat would be kosher. And when it comes to that, so then Beit Hillel is lenient. Because according to Beit Hillel, you only need Dahava Lahu, Beit Shammai L'chumra. Because in fact, Beit Shammai is machmir from that perspective. Because Beit Hillel says, in order for the meat to be kosher, all you need is the application on one corner, on one horn of the Mizbeach, in order for the Kohanim to be able to eat the sin offering, whereas Beit Shammai says, no, in order to have the Kohanim eat the sin offering, you need it on two corners of the Mizbeach. So that is in fact a stringency for Beit Shammai and not a leniency. So it highlights that, again, we could find many more stringencies where Beit Shammai is effectively more lenient than Beit Hillel. But the context, the general context of those situations are really Beit Shammai is more stringent. And yes, you can come up with a way to make what is being said by Beit Shammai more lenient. So, for example, if Beit Shammai says you have to do A, B, and C, and in order to accomplish something. And Beit Hillel is more lenient and says all you need to do is A. If you make a shvua that you're going to do this thing, so Beit Shammai would say you're only chayiv if you do A, B, and C. And if you and Beit Hillel will say no, you're going to be chayiv even if you do only one of them. If you swear that you're not going to do it. So the point is that you can make any of Beit Shammai's stringencies into a leniency, and so that is an interesting aspect. But we're not going to call them leniencies because we're focused on what the main topic is. What the main topic, can you create some other possibility? Absolutely, but we're focused on sort of what our topic of discussion is. Okay, so that is the second topic, and now we can turn to the third topic, which we will just be starting today, but we will, God willing, finish tomorrow. So according to Beit Hillel, one application of blood for a chatat is essential, but the other three are not. So the Gemara needs to now understand what rules apply to those non-essential applications. Do we say, for example, well, it's not essential, so now anybody can do it. It doesn't have to be a Kohen, etc., etc. That's what we're going to be discussing right now. Amar Rebbe Yochanan, Shalosh Manatanot Shebechatahos, the three other applications, according to Beit Hillel, who says that three of them are non-essential, Einan Bos Balayla. You still can't do them at night. Ubos Lachar Misa. But you can do them after the owner has died. As Rashi says, first of the medium wide lines in Rashi towards the bottom of Lamechet and Bet, Bos Lachar Misa, Im Natan Matana Rishona. If you already put the first one before the guy dies, Umesu, and now he dies, Mesu Baaleh, and now the owner dies, Kvar Kiper. He already got his atonement from the first application, Barishona. Ve'ein Sham Chatas Gemura. And therefore, when it comes to the remainder of the applications, it's not truly a sin offering, al hadam, that the name chatas doesn't apply to that blood because he's already gotten his atonement. Al adam no longer applies. Lifsol, to cause it to become, to the whole sacrifice to become puzzle. Vishum chatas shemesu bala, because it's now a sin offering that the owner dies. Because if in fact before the first application of blood the owner were to die, everything gets thrown out. It all goes for naught because the person died before any atonement was achieved. But if he's got the atonement, then everything else is unessential, and it's okay if it happens after the person's death. The hamala, and now back
What do you do with the animal then?
What?
What happens with the animal?
It all gets burned. All gets burned. Yeah. If assuming that it was killed already, I believe it all gets burned. If it's not killed, then I believe that it is left to die on its on its own devices. It's a terrible situation.
But where are we in this process? Where have they shechted
well,
it?
here obviously we've applied the blood,
So they've
clearly
shechted the animal.
dead.
So the animal is shechted already then.
Yes, absolutely. The
So
animal
we're not letting it die in its own devices. The
correct.
shechted.
Exactly. I was answering the broader question that you were asking. In all situations, I was sort of giving you a broad answer. Here, we're clearly dealing with the animal that was already shechted, and so as a result, according to Beit Hillel, since we applied one, then the person's already gotten the atonement. So therefore, we can apply the rest of the applications because they're not part of his atonement, and he's accomplished his atonement, and we don't have to worry about it.
But the animal,
According
the
to
meat
Beit Shammai. And according to Beit Shammai, though, because we only applied one application and you need two for his atonement, you would have to burn everything. Everything gets burned outside the Beis Hamikdash because it's no longer a valid sacrifice because the owner has died.
But according to Hillel, could they eat the meat?
Yes, absolutely. The Kohanim could eat the meat 100% because the atonement's already been achieved and the meat has already become permitted.
But it's a chatat, right? So doesn't
only the Kohanim would be eating the meat.
Only the Kohen, not the family.
Not the family. Correct.
Not the Yorshim.
Correct, not the Yorshim. Unless, of course, it's a Kohen who's bringing the sacrifice. Okay, v'hamala mehen b'chutz chayev. And So we had one thing that it's like the main applications, meaning that you can't, just as you can't do the first application at night, you can't do the other three at night. And we had something where it's different, that even though you can't offer the first one after the death of the owner, you can offer the other three after the death of the owner. Now we go back to things where it's like the first one, that it just as if you bring the blood for the first thing outside the Beis Hamikdash, you're going to be liable for bringing Kodesh outside the Beis Hamikdash. Same thing is true for this blood. Even though the blood application isn't required, isn't necessary for the atonement, if you bring it outside the Beit Hamikdash, you're going to be liable. Rav Papa. Rav Papa expands on the things that were mentioned by Rabbi Yochanan.
What's he liable for?
What?
What's he liable for? He brings the bread. He can't bring the blood out, right?
Yeah, you can't bring the blood out. At least it looks like it's kares. You're subject to kares if you bring it out on purpose, and a chatas if you bring it out accidentally. So Amar Papa yesh behen kitchila. So expanding this, there are certain things that are like the beginning of the service, meaning that you treat it just like the first application of blood. V'yesh behen gesofo. And then there are some things that are like the end of the application of blood. Remember, that's the shirayim. And the shirayim, we say, gets poured on the base of the altar, but it isn't required to be poured on the base. It's not an essential part of the service. So what are examples of things that are like the first application? Chutz, taking it outside the Beis Hamikdash. That was one that Rabbi Yochanan mentioned. Vilayla, and also doing it at night. Again, Rabbi Yochanan mentioned. But now the other things are things that Rabbi Yochanan didn't mention. Zaros, namely a non-Kohen. Just as a non-Kohen can't do the first application, he can't do the other applications. Uchli shares, and you need to use a special Beis Hamikdash vessel, and you can't, just as you need that for the first application, you need it for the other three applications. Keren ve'etzva, you need to do it on the horn of the altar, and you need to do it with your finger. So those also are required, just like the first application. Kibus. Now, kibus is an interesting one. We're going to talk about it a little bit more in just a second. Kibus is that if blood spatters, and the difference between, I had to look this up, the difference between spatter and splatter is a wide splashing, whereas spatter is a more narrow splashing. But the point is that the blood spatters on the garment of the Kohen, and it's the blood of a chatas. That garment needs to be washed in the Azara, in the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. It cannot go out to be washed. It needs to be washed internally. And so that's a special rule. And just as that special rule applies to the blood would be applied to the first corner, to the first horn of the Mizbeach, it also applies to the other three. Vishirayim, and when it comes to Shirayim, the what we treat as leftover blood. Here's the case. Rashi tells us that it's a situation where you collect the blood in 4 separate containers. Now, clearly, if you collect the blood all in one container, whatever's left over needs to be poured at the base of the altar. But the question is what is considered shirayim? And the answer is that if you can collect the blood initially in 4 separate containers, that there's four separate klishareses, then, and now you go and you put from each of the containers on each of the 4 corners, one application from each one, even though only the first application is the essential application, and so what's left over in that container will certainly be shirayim and need to be poured on the base of the altar. The same thing is true with respect to the shirayim of the other 3 containers. That also is considered shirayim. And all of that is kitchilasan. They are all just like the first 3 applications, just like the first application, so to the last 3 applications. However, Misa, if the owner were to die, lo sharia, or when it comes to what will allow somebody to eat the meat, the lo mifagla, and what would cause somebody to not do pigul, the lo ile legavai, And when it comes to if it comes inside the Kodesh of the Beis Hamikdash, inside the Heichal, that it won't make the whole sacrifice undone. Kisofan. For all of those four categories, then it's like the last three are just like the Shirayim, and as a result, none of these are a problem. Meaning that if you have the improper thoughts about Pigel for when you do the last three applications, it does not make the sacrifice Pigel, and it doesn't make it won't actually do anything to make the sacrifice permitted to eat because it's already permitted to eat, etc., etc. So Rav Papa now goes back to the kibbutz case and says, Mina, how do I know that in fact that you need to do this kind of washing of the garment if in fact even if the last three even for the last three applications. Ditnan, because we have the following Mishnah. This is a Mishnah that we will see below on Daf Tzadik Gimel Amud Aleph. Ditnan, Nitaz min hatzavar al habeged. If blood spatters from the neck or goes directly from the neck of the animal onto the garment, Eino Ton Kibbutz. That does not require washing because it isn't yet in a klisha race. It isn't yet fit for sprinkling. Min hakeren umin hayesod. And if it comes from the keren, meaning after you put it on the horn, and when you're putting it on the base, Eino Ton Kibbutz. You've already done the application. So as a result, it doesn't require washing in that situation. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so we'll finish here. So hamina roy lekeren ton kibbutz. So but that all right. So we'll go with Rav Papa's proof. We'll start right here, God willing, tomorrow. Looking forward to picking up from there.
How do you get the
We have to. I'm sorry, but they need the classroom. We'll pay. Please try and remember your question, and we'll pick it up, God willing, tomorrow.
Yasha Koach.